It's really an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be here at the National Academy of Sciences. I've had a long association with this place and to be part of this Dazer series. That's the only text slide I'm going to show you. Everything else will be an image. I am a photographer. I live where art and science mesh and have for 40 years. The exhibit here and most of the images I'm going to show you tonight are of marine invertebrates, which is my current passion. This is a Pacific giant octopus, a juvenile. It's a member of the largest octopus species in the world. Now, this is not an invertebrate, not a spineless creature. This is a Florida panther, and this is how my profession and my career began, was making these photographic portraits of charismatic megafauna, of which this surely is one. And in fact, a large print of this animal is on display permanently at the National Academy of Sciences at the other site. And this is a black-footed ferret, an endangered species. I began really focusing on the rare and endangered plants and animals on the U.S. endangered species list. And here is a Wyoming toad. This is when I started understanding 35 years ago that we as the human species tend to have our favorites. The recovery program for the black-footed ferret was $100,000, and the recovery program for the Wyoming toad was only $5,000. So I began becoming interested in the less celebrated, less often seen animals and plants that are no less important to how life works. Big jump to this animal, which is a nudibranch. Everything else I'm going to show you tonight is a marine invertebrate, but I wanted to show you where I began and where I am now. So that's an opalescent nudibranch. This is a San Juan stalk jelly. So the star-shaped figure that you see in the photograph is actually a jelly, and it stays attached to the eelgrass that you see underneath. This is a fragile file clam with these beautiful extending tentacles. And this is a white phantom crab. Most of these animals tend to be small, though not microscopic. Most of them are near shore or live on coral reefs, except there's some exceptions to that. This one came from about 350 feet down, where we were able to actually collect animals from the deep. This is one of my favorite kinds of marine invertebrates. It's called a flatworm. This is a four-lined flatworm, very delicate creature. This is a giant fleshy scale worm. It was about a foot long, which was one of the bigger animals that I photographed, beautiful iridescence. And this is a Taylor sea hare. And you can see that I'm not approaching this as a traditional nature photographer or even traditional scientific documentation. I'm really trying to create a portrait of an individual, not a species, but an individual animal in this case, an individual creature. And I visually isolate it because these animals live on that eelgrass, and they're practically invisible on the eelgrass. So it's to better reveal their characteristics. And this is a member of the largest jellyfish species, not really fish, but this also is now part of the collection here, lion's mane jelly. And this is a frosted nudibranch, very delicate animal. This is an interesting story. This is the Kanaloa squat lobster. When it was brought up in a retrofitted lobster trap, I was working on a NOAA research vessel. No one on the ship knew what it was. So they suspected that it could be a new species to science. And it was brought up from about 1,000-foot depth. And as it turns out, the detective work was done by the scientists, and it has been described as a new species based on this one specimen. Undoubtedly, there are more, but very little research happens on marine invertebrates at that depth. This is a three-line nudibranch, and this is a stubby squid. This gives you a little bit of a look into the field work. This is a NOAA research vessel, the Hi'i'olakai, that does a lot of work in the Pacific, specifically around the northwestern Hawaiian island chain. And these are fast boats that can be dispatched from the mother vessel specifically for diving and getting into areas that would be impossible to reach with a larger vessel. You can see the dive tanks, and there's hoisted up and lifted down off the vessel. This is the wet lab on the ship, where animals would be collected and fresh seawater was pumped in, and the researchers could observe the animals live, and I could photograph them live, which is what I wanted to do. So they were being kept happy while they were being studied. We were in a small space. We each had a couple of feet taped off that we could work. And so here you see basically an aquarium that I sort of modified for the photography, and I put a white bottom and a white plexiglass back that you can see there. And this is me with different color hair, but it's me. But you see I'm hand holding a flash, and I'm photographing a tiger cowrie there. And this is the resulting picture. Maybe what it might feel like if you were another tiger cowrie cruising along. Most people are familiar with these beautiful shells, but have not seen the actual live creature, which is so marvelous. And this is a broad-based tunicate. And I like to say, of all the animals that I'm going to show you tonight, this is the one that is most closely related to us as Homo sapiens. It looks much more like a vegetable. But scientists divide metazoans, animals, life on the planet, into 34 or 35 categories called phyla. And of the 34, 33 are invertebrates. The 34th, which is chordata, is where we come in. And this broad-based tunicate is in the same phyla, not because we share any visible similarities when we're mature, but in the developmental stages, there are some things that we share, specifically a notochord and pharyngeal gill slits. So the developmental stages are equally as important in determining a phylogenetic designation. These are wonderfully long. I sort of had to bunch them up a little bit in this collage. Ribbon worms and necklace worms. I became quite fond of the worms. I'm not a particular fan of terrestrial worms, but the marine worms are so fantastic. And this is another flatworm, the gold rim flatworm, and this is the leopard flatworm that lives around the Hawaiian archipelago. This is a collage that I made of nudibranchs. Now, most people don't know much about invertebrates, especially marine invertebrates. But if they know anything, they tend to know about nudibranchs because they've been so photographed and celebrated. They're so beautiful and so diverse. So this is just to give you an idea of the diversity that exists with nudibranchs. This is an Oriental sponge crab. A very cool thing that these crabs do. This crab has another animal that it attaches, you can see there, and that's a sea pen. That's another marine invertebrate. And this is another Oriental sponge crab that actually has a fire sponge that it's holding up. So it's to evade predators and also somewhat camouflage. This is a really fun one. This is a pom-pom crab, mosaic pom-pom crab. And these little pom-poms, they look like little, cheerleading pom-poms or boxing gloves, are live anemones that have stinging cells. So it's a little crab, but he's got a pretty effective technique for evading predators. This is another place where I did a lot of the field work for the project, which is the Friday Harbor Marine Lab on San Juan Island in Washington State. It's part of the University of Washington, and it's been there for over 100 years. It's a wonderful place for marine biologists to work. This is my mentor and muse, Dr. Gustav Pauli, one of the world's most accomplished and enthusiastic marine invertebrate biologist. And here he's mining invertebrates on the tire bumpers on the dock. And it was just amazing what he was able to find. So I would attach myself 6 years running in the summers to his classes where he'd be working with students and doing his own research. This is the research vessel there that we were able to take out, do some dredging because it's not a coral reef habitat. And then bring up whatever's on the bottom, which is just a wonderful feast, a treasure chest of different kinds of marine flora and fauna, and then separate things out, take them into the lab where animals can be kept happy in a situation like this, again, with fresh seawater being brought in right from the harbor, and students can study, scientists can observe, and I can set up back in the corner my little studio set up and make these portraits of marine invertebrates. So here you see again, I'm hand holding the light with the white bottom and the white back, and this is a wonderful hermit crab, the wide hand hermit crab, looking back out at you there. And I became, again, I mentioned, kind of a fan of marine worms. These worms build these beautiful tubes from sand grains. And apparently not any sand grain will do. Quite a bit of research has been done showing the process of these worms actually constructing their tubes. This is a photograph of the inhabitant of one of those tubes. It's a large green ornate. It's its own phyla. Extending from its tube. And here you have an ice cream cone worm tube. I never met the actual ice cream cone worm, but I was very enamored by the home that this animal was able to construct with these sand grains and this kind of secretion that acts like a mortar. They're like little artisans. And this is Gustav Pauli again with his hand reaching down as far as he could. He said, I need an arm extension. He was looking for a particular marine worm called a Diapatra, ornate tube worm, with the students. And we were at a place called False Bay on San Juan Island, low tide. So it's not easy to see these animals. And if you can find one, it's very, very difficult to lift them out and extract them whole because they're delicate. But he was able to do it, and he's showing the students the tube. It's more like parchment because this worm also builds a home that it lives inside. This is the animal that lives inside that tube. This fantastic, fantastic, iridescent, beautiful gills. I feel like Pixar has nothing on these, but maybe Pixar is inspired by, I hope so, by some of these wondrous, wondrous creatures. And this is another tube-building marine worm called a Vancouver feather duster. These are chitons, and their repertoire of behavior is very limited. So they just attach themselves usually to rocks at the shoreline. They're beautiful, though. To me, this is a collage that I made. It took many years to find this many different ones. But these all came from around Friday Harbor in the Northwest. And related in the same phyla is this animal. So they're all, and as well as octopus, they're all within the same phyla of cephalopods, which is a marvelous phyla, one of my favorites. These are decorator crabs. These crabs pick up whatever is available or whatever they choose. We have not quite been able to sort that out, but it's a camouflage techniques to avoid predation. But it's a wonderful adaptation that they've developed. So here, there's actually a bryozoan as a headdress that this crab is tending to make sure it's still in place. And no two are the same. This one has sort of like little red algae knee pads and also some bryozoans, other animals attached. And I'm going to conclude my short presentation with a little suite of hermit crabs, which are one of my favorite marine invertebrates. It's such a marvelous adaptation. This is, again, a wide-hand hermit that lives inside a living sponge. So they both get something out of this arrangement. Probably the sponge gets mobility and table scraps, and the crab gets a home. Here, more hermit crabs. In this case, these are all the same species of hermit crabs, but wildly different home choices, probably depending on what was available to be had. And of course, this hermit crab on the bottom got a very luxe home with this beautiful textile cone snail shell. And this is a Dardanus hermit crab, but I call it the nudist. So this also is a collage. In the upper left is a hermit crab without any protection. They really don't like being in that situation because they're so vulnerable. Their abdomen is very soft and probably very delicious to a potential predator. And I felt like they were embarrassed, but I think it was just, scared. So as soon as I put the shell in the tank, this animal within seconds was inside and feeling much better. And this is the same hermit crab inside, same species of hermit crab inside another shell. And what you see here are 3 anemones and a calciferous worm and a rare species of barnacle on the shell. So it's a whole living community, just that one animal. And this is a collage I put together just to leave you with a sense of the wonderful diversity that exists in this realm of life. Sylvia Earle wrote the foreword for the book Spineless, which is available here. And when I was talking to her about the title, I said, I want to call it Spineless, Portraits of Marine Invertebrates, the Backbone of Life in the Sea. And she said, no, it's the backbone of life, period. Without these animals, 98% of all the animals in the ocean are invertebrates. They're the foundation for all of life on the planet. So thank you.